welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we're going to be building on what we covered last podcast, which is mainly around the food side of things and managing your hunger. And these are some things beyond food that you can do to help you manage your hunger when dieting or trying to lose weight. Again, I think this is a really important thing that people often just try and fight, and we'll cover some interesting points around that actually, when I've spoken to a lot of clients, they've found is a real game changer and can really help with their mindset and makes everything a lot easier just with these few simple things. So we'll jump straight in. The first one, and this is probably the biggest one and I often see people getting wrong, is accepting it and leaning into hunger. As we said, hunger is a natural phenomenon within the body, and people often try to run away from it. They want to diet without feeling hungry, and your body will have these natural processes to alert you and almost get you to eat more food. So I think it's important that if you can lean into it and ride it a little bit, almost like when we talk about the 3D method of delay, distract, decide, where you're trying to ride the wave or surf the urge, as some people might call it. Hunger is a part of that. I describe it as being like a tide that comes in and then comes out, and it will fade eventually. So accepting it and riding it out can help with that mindset instead of trying to constantly find things to get rid of it and to not feel hungry. Dieting will involve an element of hunger. And this is a thing that can be really emphasized if you're trying to fight it. You're trying all these tricks, these low calorie hacks and things, which are brilliant in certain circumstances, but you'll never beat it. And if you're playing the game of trying to, biohack your hunger so you're not going to feel hungry when you're dieting, there are things you can do that are quite extreme, but I wouldn't recommend them because actually you're probably fighting a losing battle there. And just embracing it and leaning into it, is what we'd say, is a really powerful way that going, oh, I'm just a bit hungry and that's okay. And a lot of people I know, when they've dieted in the past, they've almost hit that almost emergency button when they felt hungry and gone to reach for everything that they can to try and get rid of it and end up overeating on their calories, when actually going, just a bit hungry, it's a natural process, can just ride it out. And like we said on the 3D method, delay, distract, decide, trying to find something to engage in can be a really useful tactic, because as you know, sometimes when you've been that busy doing things, you forget to eat. So actually having your attention elsewhere can be a useful tactic around that. So a 2010 study found that people who accepted their hunger and ate when they were hungry were more likely to lose weight and keep it off than those who tried to suppress the hunger, which I thought was a really interesting statistic, that you might feel that people trying to find ways to suppress it might actually be beneficial in the long run, but actually embracing it as part of the process, as I've said. Another study in 2011 found that people who practice mindful based eating, and this is something that we'll probably do a whole other episode on, it's a really useful tool, and that involves paying attention to your fullness cues and your hunger cues as well. Those people are more likely to lose weight and have low levels of body fat than those who did not practice mindful based eating. And there's lots of reasons around that, why that might be the case, that actually might make a lot of sense. But there's some real useful tactics that we can discuss, and it deserves its whole own episode, in my opinion. So first one was accepting or leaning into hunger. Number two, know your limits of hunger. And this one ties quite tightly in with the first one. And this always brings me back to a advert that's quite famous in the UK. So if you're not from the UK, you might not have seen it. But it's about, you're not you when you're hungry, and you usually get these people who their whole personality changes. And you knowing what your levels of hunger are and where you can sort of lean into is an experimental sort of thing. When you're new to it, you might find that you surpass it, or you might have experience in the past where you might have gone too far with it and ended up eating everything within sight, which is a completely normal thing to do. But knowing how far you can lean to that hunger is a really powerful tool as well. So there's a big difference between being hungry and being ravenous, and it's just knowing where you cross that line. And I've posted some graphics, which I'll probably post again recently, or I might share it here, I don't know, I might change the format of this podcast a little bit, but it's the hunger scale and getting familiar with that hunger and fullness, like with the mindful based eating tactics that we were talking around. And it's useful to know where you sit on that scale and tuning yourself and going, right, I'm on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely full, 10 being completely empty. Where do I sit at the moment? Maybe I'm about a 6 or a 7. Okay, maybe I should start thinking about having a meal soon. Oh, I'm an 8 or 9. Well, probably start getting some food in quickly before I get too hungry. Or you might have got to that point already. Or if you're a 5 or a 6, you might go and wait a bit longer, wait an hour, another hour or two potentially. it's not a good time to eat now because I'm not really hungry enough for that meal yet. So that's a useful tactic. Obviously, there's lots of things around sort of different analogies that we could pick from, but I thought it was useful with a lot of these sort of anecdotal stuff that I found working with people and myself when I've dieted in the past, but also pairing it up with what the research says. So a 2015 study found that people who waited too long to eat were more likely to overeat at their next meal. And that's often that we see where you're letting yourself get too hungry. And again, I feel like a lot of these things that we can do are quite separate tactics, but they all interlink really well. So we'll cover a little bit more that might link into that quite well later on. Another earlier study found that people who ate when they were slightly hungry lost more weight and had lower levels of body fat than those who waited until they were too hungry or very hungry to eat. And again, it's just you knowing you. And this is where it's an imperfect science. There's going to be lots of things that will affect how you're responding to hunger. No, there's a huge amount of things that can affect our day-to-day life. Stress being a big part of it. Your sort of routines and rituals might be all changed up. You might have things coming on that thrown onto you last minute. You might have food prepared, and you picking the best option that you can. And often one of the biggest things that I talk about people is just picking the best option that you can. Don't worry about being perfect, what the perfect things to do. Just do the best that you can in the situation that you're in with the tools that you have available. It's a really important tactic to take forward, not just in when you're dieting, but in every part of your life, because it's a huge freeing actual process where you go, you know what, I give it my best. And there's some memes or not memes or infographics that you might see or quotes from people. It's like, if you only have 30% to give and you give 30%, then you've given 100%, and making sure that you're recognizing that rather than expecting more, expecting yourself to handle these situations really well when you're sort of feeling out the process with your hunger or getting into your dieting phase. Just learning from it is a really big part of it, but accepting that things are going to happen and they're not going to go to plan always, and that's okay, because as long as you know that you're doing the best that you can, that's all you can do. So second of all was knowing your limits and getting familiar with that. Number 3, and I might feel like banging an old drum here, but sleep. Sleep, as we've spoken about in episodes 33 and 34 of the Balanced Approach podcast, we spoke about the wide-reaching impacts that sleep can have that a lot of people might find quite interesting, quite shocking, and some of the things that are associated with better sleep and poorer sleep. So if you've not listened to those after this episode, I highly suggest looking into episode 33 and 34 of the Balanced Approach podcast, where we talk about not necessarily just why sleep is so important, but things you can do simply to implement that I talk to my clients about quite a lot that has had massive improvements on their sleep. So we'll do a little bit of a shortened version of those episodes now, but there's a lot more information, a lot more benefits. Listen to the whole episode if you haven't already. So managing your sleep can be a game changer on so many assets. Better to let people make better decisions, in my opinion. And an interesting thing to remember is that we're all just grown-up children, that we can be cranky when we've not had enough sleep, we can be emotional or less rational, and it's important to recognise that often sleep can be one of the things that's contributing us to not making the best decisions possible. But the physiological aspects of poor sleep as well is increased hunger the next day. If you had a poor night's sleep, increased hunger, you have reduced drive to move, so you're less likely to be physically active, and those two are fighting against us if we're looking to lose weight and diet. They're fighting against where we want to be. And then also there's an increased drive for more highly palatable foods. What is a phrase that I'd use? Or more calorie dense foods that are going to be high in calories, usually high in fat, high in sugar and high in salt, low in nutrients, low in volume. Typical things might be fast foods, sort of pizzas, your burgers, your fries, or sort of your chocolates or your sweets. Those sort of things are a perfect combination to get loads of calories in really quickly, which can be fantastic in some circumstances, but probably not ideal to have all the time, and not ideal to have a massive craving for when you're looking to diet, as they can really put you out on a lot of calories quite quickly. Better sleep, when we talk about health perspectives as well, better sleep is linked to better health outcomes with regards to type 2 diabetes, obesity in general, cancer risks, stroke, cardiovascular disease. So as I've said, it's probably worthwhile if that's all new information to you. Fantastic. It's great that you're learning, but have a real deep dive into episode 33 and 34 of the Balanced Approach podcast, where we discuss that in a lot more depth, and hopefully will really make you realize why I think it's one of the most important things that people improve their overall health, well-being and happiness as well. So definitely check that out. So we've done 3. On to number 4, your environment. So this is often something that I talk to people a lot around, is just controlling the things that we can control, controlling the controllables. And potentially that's a whole discussion and something that I spoke about to my email list recently around your circle of influence. And one of the things that can be hugely impactful is our environment can be triggering for us to even subliminal thoughts. But there's a huge impact of seeing, smelling, hearing someone speak about it, or just thinking about certain food. That will play on your mind. Why do you think these advertising companies, these food companies, pay huge amounts for primetime TV slots just to get in front of your eyes, just get you thinking about their product, seeing their product, just having a passing thought? Because next time, potentially when you're feeling hungry, that'll be one of the first things that comes to your mind. There's really interesting thing that when I was doing my master's in nutrition, we actually had a look at the layouts of supermarkets, and one of the things that one of the local supermarkets for us was they had the bakery, and I think Lidl are really good at this now in the UK as well, to have the bakery right in front of the shop. Really appealing smell, lots of nice pastries for you to pick up, and it just warms you in, it gets you in the mood for food, so you're more likely to probably buy more food. I don't know if there's any research around that, probably is, but I haven't looked at it, just something off the top of my head. But the layout of supermarkets is hugely impactful as well. Talk about eye lines, byline, and things when you can see it, you're more likely to have it. So one way is to modify your environment, and it could be simply, I'm not one of these people that's going to tell you that you shouldn't have things like chocolates, snacks, crisps in the house, or anything that you really enjoy. It's just about moderating the amount that we can have and find the balance that's going to work for you, having a more balanced approach. But actually making them or putting them in a position where you're choosing to have them rather than they're almost coaxing you in is a really powerful tool. And this is something I've worked on with people improving their relationship with food as well, is actually making it harder to get to. And when we talk about behavior change, we talk about putting lube or friction in place. This is adding friction to foods potentially that we don't want to overeat, and putting lube in place for foods that we do want to eat. So having fruit on the counter, which is going to be a lower calorie, high volume, nutritious snack. Potentially having something like your chocolates or your crisps at the back of the cupboard. They're still there if you want them, but they're not constantly within your eyesight, so you're less likely to eat them. I know I'm guilty of this as well, when you've got fruits and vegetables in the fridge and they go off because you just don't look at them enough. Having them out on display makes you more likely to eat them. So a 2013 study found that people who were exposed to pictures such as sugary drinks, the smell of baked goods, are more likely to salivate and more likely to overeat at their next meal or overeat on these foods. And that just sort of supports what we're saying, is even having them around you, seeing them, smelling them, can be a big trigger for you overeating. And just moderating your environment in any way that you can help with controlling those, it's almost cravings and hunger pangs, and you making better decisions, more informed and more conscious decisions, rather than having that drive and constantly being tempted by those foods. So number 5, last of all, and as I've said, a lot of these will link into each other, is building an eating routine. Just like when we speak about sleep and activity, habits and behaviors get results, or routines and rituals get results. Your body likes routine with regards to waking up and going to sleep, but also around meals as well. So having a eating routine, again, helps you know when that food is coming in, but also helps with doubling up as you knowing how long you can go between meals before you get too hungry. And if we are more consistent with our food choices, then we roughly know when we're going to be likely to get hungry after that meal. And this is where everything sort of links in. So having that routine and allowing yourself to be comfortably full, satisfied, not stuffed from that meal, again, allows you a couple of hours between where you're potentially going to be less likely to snack, because right, I've only got to ride out another half hour, 45 minutes, cram some more engaging activities so I'm not looking or searching around the kitchen for food, and know that I'm going to ride it out to lunch. Okay, if you're having a more erratic eating routine where your meals are all over the place, you're grab and go, then you're probably going to be less likely to make better decisions, probably going to have more food at times because you're worried or you're overly hungry turning up to that meal, or you're worried about when you're next going to get your meal in. And there will be occasions where that will be the case, but trying to control it as much as we can on the whole, more often than not. If we can get into a routine with our breakfast, lunch and dinner, maybe snacks in between, and know what those can be, then that can be a really good opportunity for us to lean into hunger in between, fully engage in tasks elsewhere. Hopefully our environment's a bit more supportive, where we're not going to be overeating or having temptations in our face all the time. And we know that we can control our energy intake a lot better. So there we have it, the 5. So we've got accepting and leaning into hunger, really powerful tool, definitely something that can be a game changer for a lot of people. Just leaning in and going, right, just a bit of hunger, not the end of the world, not panic. It doesn't have to hit the big red button to go, right, all systems go, I need to get anything I can. Actually, a bit of hunger is okay, and something that's going to be happening quite a lot if you're dieting. So accepting it is huge. Knowing your limits with that, how far you can go, that's an important sort of skill to develop, and it's like a muscle. You've got to work at it. You might get it first time, but there'll be times where you might overstep the mark, and that's completely fine as well. Just using those tools that you can to develop that skill of knowing where your hunger sits, tuning in with that hunger and going, right, potentially I need to get a meal in soonish, or planning that in. And that links me to number 5 as well. Sleep. I've gone on and on about sleep. I still think it's hugely important, and something that if you're not fully bought into and you haven't listened to episode 33 and 34, definitely do, because I think there's a huge amount of valuable information that can make you prioritize sleep and unlock what I'd call a superpower, which is sleep. Number 4, environment. Checking in what's around you, things that are potentially triggering you, controlling the controllables with that, and managing as best you can, as often as you can, without being too neurotic around it. And last of all, building an eating routine. Again, building in routine in general is really important, but having a routine more often than not with regards to your activity, your sleep, and your food can be really useful, and I'd highly recommend start developing. Yes, there'll be occasions where it's not perfect, but that's okay. But having that eating routine will allow you to manage your hunger a lot better and get used to managing your hunger, allow you to know what food's potentially going to help you fill up in between, and just get a lot more quicker and better results long term with your dieting. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.